Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Huang. Today, I'm with a special guest, Tanmai. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey Tony, hey everybody. I'm Tanmai. I'm the CEO co-founder at Hasura, doing a lot of interesting things in the AI space. So I'm always excited to shoot the breeze on the latest and greatest in AI.
Very cool. So I'm interested in your point of view on what's going on right now with like RAG, for instance. RAG has changed so much in the past year that it was super, super hot, I'd say quarter 4 of 2023. And then people were getting more invested into like agentic systems. But in order to use agentic systems, you still have to use RAGs. Can you just tell me from your point of view, like how RAGs changed and like starting from like beginning and then up until now, like what's the current like status of RAG?
Yeah. So the quick note on RAG is it's a broad technique to kind of bring in more relevant data into your conversation with an LLM, right? So LLMs are inherently conversational in their kind of input and output. And if you're thinking about, hey, how do I have a good conversation with an LLM? You need to the better your prompt is, the better your output is, right? Is the broad understanding of how people use LLMs. And when you have a lot of private data, internal data, a lot of data that you want to look at, then what you try to do is say, instead of manually as a user trying to figure out like the right pieces of data, constructing the most amazing prompt, and then asking the LLM, you try to short circuit that a little bit by saying, can I use a RAG based technique, retrieval augmented generation? Can I do something like a search to retrieve the right relevant pieces of data, then give it to the LLM and then get output, right? So that's the broad idea behind RAG. Now, was very hot and still is very popular because people see it as the only kind of silver bullet to integrate data that the LLM doesn't know about, right? Because the LLM doesn't know about your database, your emails, your Slack conversation, your data in some database, right? Your support tickets. The AI is not trained on that, doesn't know about it. That data keeps changing. Even if it was trained on it, data has not changed, right? So what you do is do like a search. So the user is asking a question, wants to do a task. You try to search for things that are relevant to that query, bring that up, and then give that to LLM. And it was like the silver bullet approach of saying, if I can make my data searchable, I should on the fly be able to do a search query, fetch the right bits, and then use it with an LLM, right? And people got super hyped about it because it was the first time they could integrate some data with an LLM. And there was a lot of excitement. And I think that's cooled off over the last year and a half. And even more, people started calling it almost 1.5, 2 years ago. That the problem is it's work, but it doesn't work when you need a depth and breadth of ads. It's like with Google search, when you're doing something with Google, a, a a good answer is good enough, and that's fine. But in an enterprise scenario, in a real like a in a medical scenario or something that's mission critical, good enough is what sounds right or what is good enough is not the threshold. It has to be accurate and precise. It has to be the latest information about how to handle a contract, the latest information about this customer. It has to have accurate numbers, right? And that's the kind of stuff where RAG doesn't work. And so when things kind of become mission critical, RAG starts to fall off. So I think what's happened over the last 2 years and why it started to cool down, because all of the low hanging fruit use cases that we could do with Gen AI and RAG are done. Um, and now when you want to do something more sophisticated, RAG doesn't feel like it's enough, right? So that's the state of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of work that still needs to be done with RAG because right now I think a lot of this is my opinion on RAG, which is it was built about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It was
Mm.
built a couple of years ago when it actually started, but it took off when people realized that you could use vector databases to store your chunks in there, and the whole premise of RAG. But at that time, a year and a half ago, everybody was focused on building RAG off of language models that had small context windows. So
Mm.
you had context windows of 2K or 4K,
Right,
and it worked for at that time. But
right.
now up like at this point in time, we have LMs, state of the art, like closed source LMs that have 1 to 2 million context
Tokens.
window.
Yep.
So the old school way of doing RAG doesn't make any, to me at least, doesn't make any sense because it was built on smaller context windows. So there needs to be like a drastic change in like the way that we do RAG at least the chunking portion or like the document loading portion. Like those two portions are like really important for RAG. And I feel like with the new maturity of foundational models that have come out now, that there should be something like different than what we're used to. Because I don't know if, about you, like but off the shelf RAG systems, Pinecone or whatever, or
Right.
Weaviate, that when you use those RAG systems, you typically dump into them like recursive character text splitter with a re-ranker. That's a very classic way of doing RAG. And I feel as if all these like managed services out there, like from your AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft, all of the studios, they all use the same type of chunking methodology to build out your RAG. So I'm curious from like your point of view, is there like a better way to do it other than the traditional way that everyone else is used to doing it?
Yeah, yeah. I
Or
think I
have we just not focused enough on RAG and we're like too focused on the current hot thing, which is like agentic systems?
Yeah, yeah. I think so. I think it definitely has to be agentic because the fundamental, I think RAG has reached its limits is the vanilla definition of RAG, right? So agentic RAG or deciding to use like one of the pieces of it as a tool in a broader set of tools is the approach that's making sense, right? Um, One of the kind of simplest ways to understand like the limitation of RAG is RAG actually does not understand the context of what you're trying to do. It's like a hammer. It's like a one single hammer to do everything, right? So if you go to Gemini and Gmail right now, latest version of Gemini, latest model, 1 million, 2 million context window, whatever you want to say doesn't matter, right? Go to your Gmail right now and just ask it like, help me submit a travel expense report for work from last month's emails, right? I need to submit an expense report for travel, collect that for me. And just try that out and witness the horrificness of the responses that you get. It's insane. Like it's insanely bad, right? It'll work differently every single time. It'll miss things. It won't understand what you want to do. You'll try to do a follow up and it won't work, right? You ask it a question, you're like, how much did I spend on Uber last month? And it says, you spent X dollars on Uber Eats. And they're like, no, I'm not talking about Uber Eats, I'm talking about Uber trips. And it says you spent Y dollars on Uber trips. And then you look at the emails and you're like, no, I can clearly see it's more than Y. But the reason why it came up with the number Y is because when it does a RAG search, it picks up the last six emails. But who's to say that the number of documents that you should have returned in your search results should have been the last six, right? Because I said last month. So what's the number limitation? Is it six? Is it 100? What if I do a lot of travel? What if it's like 1,000, right? Or what if I'm an EA and I manage to schedule for three or four people and then it's 1,000 emails? So it's it's obviously not going to work when I try to do something serious with it. If I want to do a quick, what did I order last on Uber? Yeah, sure. What do I commonly eat when I order from DoorDash? Yeah, I'll get an answer. And it's okay if the answer is loosely correct, right? But it's definitely not going to work when I need to submit my expense report. And it doesn't today. And that's where RAG is like, why I believe like RAG has reached its kind of limit as a technique. It needs to be composed with something else, in particular, like some kind of a semantic layer, something that gives meaning to the data, whether it's emails or whatever that you're looking at, so that you're more intelligently working with that. You're not just doing a search, dump, chunk, re-rank, result. That pipeline doesn't scale beyond the basics. It is my point of view. Does that track?
Yeah. So when you build out, say, like an agentic system and you have RAG in there, typically you have tools that would help you gather more information or do more tasks. What's your like point of view on the way that tools are being built right now? The big hot thing is model control protocol. That's going
Mhm.
to probably be very ubiquitous
Yeah,
everywhere. On the news, Microsoft did announce that they were making MCP part of Windows. So that's super exciting.
it's
Um,
huge.
yeah, it's going to be a first party like add-on. So it's or a first party architecture add-on. So I think it's going to be very big. So having like screen and mouse control moving forward is from a major vendor is going to be huge.
Yeah,
So like from your point of view, like where is like tooling like heading towards?
yeah. So that the tool calling and the tool composition stuff, I think, is working really well. It's again an idea that came out I want to say maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I think tool calling is it's gone really well. And especially with MCP, I think tool calling has come back into fashion. We were talking a lot about tool calling and tool composition, and then it died down. And then, like with MCP, it's come back. And MCP is solving that big problem of tool connectivity, which is like half the times I can't even connect to the right tools, like the mouse tool, the keyboard tool, the browser tool, or whatever. And I think that's a great start. And it starts to make our AI systems a lot more useful in doing and connecting with the real world and actually trying to do things, right? The big problem, of course, anybody who's used MCP in production to do something serious is that they still have kind of that reliability and accuracy problem with MCP, which is that, look, if you have two or three tools with MCP, it's fine. But as soon as you have 100, it breaks. It doesn't work. It hallucinates. The amount of context that is used to require to describe the tools itself becomes so large that interactions become slow or fidelity starts to go down. You know what I mean? It's like you have 50 tools and you do the same, you ask the same question, you want the same task to be done. It just does it in really different ways. And, and sometimes it's okay, but most of the times, if you're doing something serious, it's not, right? So you're not going to get the repeatability that you want. What it does help with is one-off integrations, right? Like I'm coding and I need MCP to also pull in data from maps for some reason because I'm writing some geolocation app, right? So that's good. But as soon as I say that I have 50 tools that I need to orchestrate, right? That becomes, that doesn't work really well. That kind of like cognitively confuses the LLM, even the latest generation ones. And the latest generation ones have a new problem. I don't know if you saw the news about when O3 got released a few weeks ago. I don't know if you saw that really great analysis where somebody's tweeting saying they did there's a lab that does reliability analysis. They're like, the new models have gotten so intelligent that they've become really good at convincing themselves and you that when in fact they're hallucinating. So you ask O3 and you're like, call this Python tool, maybe over MCP or whatever it is, and say, do a thing for me. And then O3 says, yeah, I called it. This is what the result is. And then you're like, man, I didn't even connect a Python tool to you. Bro, you're not even connected to the tool. And then O3 says, and that's literally what it says, I went outside ChatGPT onto my laptop and I executed this code on a laptop and I brought it in. So that's one of the big things as that's the horizon, right? That's the horizon of what comes after MCP is starting to figure out when we have really smart models and we have really complex tools, how are we still going to prevent kind of the hallucination and or how are we going to achieve reliability when when the number of MCP tools that you have is complex, when the task that you're doing is pretty mission critical. That's I'd say the horizon problem of what people at the cutting edge are starting to work on or figure out.
Yeah, my big problem with tooling and MCP right now is that there's way too many vulnerabilities in it.
Yeah.
Like even like for instance, there was like a company who had a graphics design person that went and downloaded like Comfy UI, which is like a an image video generator,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they downloaded something that had a backdoor on there because it's all open source. And all of a sudden now like the information that they stored on the computer got backdoored and through this like Comfy UI. I'm not trying to put Comfy UI on the spot, but I do like that tool. It's just the fact that someone backdoored using open source software concerns me.
Yeah.
And then in the future, when tooling becomes a lot more ubiquitous, where you're going to have repos upon repos of tools, and you're going to be like, okay, I want this tool. You download the open source. There could be vulnerabilities on there. Right now, MCP, those model control servers, they do have a lot of vulnerabilities that haven't been patched up, and it's right now. This is like current state. Like,
I think it's a
yeah,
temporary thing though, right? I don't know if any serious business is building like MCP servers that are insecure. If I was like, yeah, we're like in our clients are like Fortune 100 government federal type agencies, right? And it's if we built an MCP thing, it would like there's no way that we'd ship an MCP server that we would bulletproof that the way that we bulletproof an API, right? Like you wouldn't change that. But I think your point is totally accurate. We're still in a little bit of that hype phase of MCP of like, oh, MCP, everything. And then everybody's just hacking things together with MCP and they're just trying it out. And then the user who's using it doesn't know what the difference between trying it out is versus like it's production grade and I can use it seriously. And you have this insane amount of vulnerability, security loopholes, people just doing crazy things. But I think I'm optimistic in that it's like a temporary phase and a few months down the line, stuff will try to get serious. You know what I mean? But I
Yeah.
think it's like the same as like an API security. Like it's imagine like the first time APIs came out and we're so excited, we're just building APIs. Don't do that. Don't just build them. Like think about it before you build it and ship it.
Yeah, so with the proliferation of coding assistants such as like Cursor, Windsurf, these coding assistants, they offer like tooling built into it, like agentic like style frameworks, which kind of allows you to do this thing called vibe coding, which I don't like. Basically, you can have a person that has like minimal experience being able to build out entire apps from scratch over the course of, say, a weekend by calling these tools. And I've noticed that there has been a surge of apps being created by these like Gen AI powered coding assistants.
Um,
But I've also noticed that a lot of the apps that go into production have a ton of vulnerabilities. Like there was like cases where like this person built an app that tapped into a database and then the credentials like weren't encrypted and so you can actually see them through the app. And that's really embarrassing because that person that created it didn't know how to code, so they were just relying heavily on the coding assistant. And I just feel like it has it's made coding a lot more accessible, but it's also I don't think anyone's gonna get their job taken away from them because the quality of the code isn't as good because you don't understand the basic fundamentals of coding, and you're relying too heavily on the tooling to do it.
yeah,
So like from your point of view, are you seeing a lot of
yeah,
people rely too heavily on tools?
yeah. I think so. I think a lot of people are doing vibe coding stuff, but I would call them like non-serious use cases, right? Nobody's shipping production software with vibe coding. People are using like IDEs to help them do stuff, like I said, IDO and Cursor and stuff like that. And that's also gone through a fair bit of change and whatnot. So people use them as I see my senior engineering team kind of use that uh, in very precise ways. They'll do like really precise refactors, some amount of code gen where they don't want to go look up documentation, get some boilerplate code ready. But they're not like vibe coding a full stack app because that's still there's too many pieces that can go wrong. Where even if it works, like you said, there's too many pieces that exist that can cause like security problems or vulnerabilities or edge cases or performance issues or like a whole host of things, right? It's still challenging. What really excites me though about vibe coding is a, I think that if I was a SaaS company today, or if I was just a business today that had developers and had an IT team, right? What I would do is I would take out a bunch of them, like 5, 10 of the best. They've been in my company for the longest time. They know everything. They're quote unquote the best engineers that I have. I take them, put them in a room and say, can you build a custom vibe coding IDE and maintain that for my non-technical users inside my company? And I would have them learn from what's happening in Cursor and IDER and V0 and Figma Make and whatever, right? And I would have to put together like a custom pipeline. It uses my component library, right? It uses like my authenticate, like it's got a bunch of stuff that's like very specific to my company, right? And it creates like a safe sandbox for my non-technical users to actually vibe code, right? But safely. And that's really exciting, right? That could be very high impact because then I can have sales folks or sales ops folks essentially build out their own automation and say, yeah, let's take all the call data that we have and automatically do data entry into our CRM. Or oh, you're getting a bunch of like these medical transcripts. Let me like vibe code a thing that takes this and inserts it into something here, right? Or that renders this or visualizes this in a particular way for my doctors or nurses or whatever it is, right? Whatever that situation is, I feel like that could be really exciting because I think vibe coding has showed us that it's possible, right? But but I think what's interesting is when you can set up those guardrails and actually make it like your own custom vibe coding platform, right? Not, I don't think a generic vibe coding platform is going to be useful to anybody, right? But that's going to be, I think that's going to be pretty exciting. But it's a lot of work.
So I know that Gen AI has been very powerful, like a very powerful tool for like data analysts, especially in the like Gen AI to SQL generation. Because a lot of the times a data analyst will spend a lot of time building out SQL code, running it, testing it. Gen AI does lower that barrier quite a bit. So from your point of view, have you seen a lot of people adopt Gen AI for SQL generation in the data analyst space?
Yeah, a lot actually. A lot of analysts are starting to use a lot of SQL generation type stuff, but it's almost exactly the same as developers using IDEs, right, for writing code. It's the exact same analogy for an analyst where they're like using these IDEs to write SQL instead of writing code. It's pretty much the exact same. And so I think that happened almost on overnight. I think no analyst worth their salt is still sitting there and trying to write like SQL queries by hand. It just, especially if it's complex. Like sure, if it's select star from table limit one, yeah, great, no big deal. But I think almost every analyst worth their salt is using AI, using some kind of an assistant, whether it's cursor, some of the more advanced ones have started using things like cursors with like context files to describe their schema. But also literally just pop it into Claude, right? Like you just give Claude access to your schema, like just print out the whole schema, give it to Claude, and then be like, help me make a SQL query that does this. And it, as an analyst, that's something that's happened, I think, almost overnight. They instantly saw this and they started using it. I think the horizon problem, of course, here, the interesting problem that everybody's trying to work on when people say that text to SQL doesn't work, right? Like you talk to anybody and you're like, hey, does text to SQL work for you? And they'll be like, yeah, doesn't really get it right. And what they're actually saying is that it works as a co-pilot to the analyst. What it doesn't do is replace the analyst yet. So if I'm a business user, and we were talking about this earlier, you're like, you have data about, let's say, podcasts and stuff like that. And what you want to do is get information about it. If you're a SQL ninja and all of that data is in a SQL database, yes, you can use a copilot to help you get like that data, right? But if you're a business user and you just have a question in natural language and you expect an accurate, insightful answer, that's definitely a huge gap, right? Something is wrong with text to SQL in that it's not capturing that kind of context about the intent of the user, about the business, about the domain. It's not actually able to replace the analyst or be an analyst, right? Replace the analyst sounds like sounds different, but just be an analyst, right? Be the analyst agent. Like you're the agent, that's the analyst. So instead of talking to my analyst on Slack, I just talk to you on Slack, and then you just do the thing. That doesn't exist yet. That's still a problem with text to SQL. But every single analyst worth their salt is using AI system to help them write SQL for sure. Like 100%.
And you guys built something in-house called Prompt QL. Can you describe what that does?
Yeah. So PromptQL is so when we like look at the system and we kind of talk through RAG a little bit, we talk through tool composition, we talk through like text to SQL or even like vibe coding or like automation, right? And when we kind of talk about all of these things, when you see all of the places where they work and they don't work, the places where they don't work is all of the places where the AI system needs a lot of knowledge about what you're trying to do or achieve or the context of your business that's missing. That's the hard problem, right? The hard problem is that if you knew enough about the data or the kind of data that I had and my question and and my unique business terminology, then you know what to do. For example, if in the context of my company, typically what like the AI, when I say is help me submit a travel expense report, right, on email data, my company has a unique definition of what travel expense report, what are valid travel expenses. If something's missing, some context that exists in my mind in my company amongst 100, 200,000, 10,000 people, that missing thing is what's resulting in a lot of suboptimal kind of performance, right? Whether it's RAG or tool calling or text to SQL or even vibe coding, right? It's like the guardrails or the custom context of that business is missing. And so what we've done with PromptQL is we did two things. One, the overall technique in the way that we integrate data is dynamic, or it agentically chooses whether it should do RAG or tool calling or text to SQL or a combination of them. So it composes these kind of three different techniques on the fly, right? So it's, oh yeah, this one looks like we should do a SQL query and then we should augment that with the search semantic vector database search. And then we should call this tool to go do this. And then there's an API sitting here with MCP. Let's go call that. And then let's compose this final result or answer or whatever it is, right? So one is agentically choosing between these techniques. And I think that has a huge unlock. But the biggest unlock is being able to capture the context of the business. So what the system does is if you ask it the question, hey, help me submit my travel expenses for last month looking at my emails, and the AI gets it wrong, then you can nudge it. You can be like, no, travel for me means Uber and this and that. And then it also means this. And then ignore everything that's over $500 because that's the maximum I can spend. Nothing below $5 matters. Ignore it. It works. Next week, when I do this, or anybody else in my company asks the same question, right? This information will be learned, right? So the semantic layer, the context of the business is automatically captured. And that has a huge unlock for, especially for like important mission critical use cases, because that self improvement keeps happening. So your power users kind of make the AI better and they make the AI kind of more custom to your kind of use case or your organization. So that's kind of been what we've been working on to address a bunch of these problems. And I think it's provided a pretty massive unlock.
Very cool. And then for the viewers at home who would be more interested in learning more from this, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Just hit me up on Twitter. If you search for my name, Tanmai, you'll find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm okay, responsive on both. But once we start chatting, we'll probably connect more on email or something. But feel free to reach out, talk anything about talk about kind of AI data, especially if you're doing anything critical with AI where you need high reliability and accuracy. Always kind of love to chat about that. Um, See if there's something we can do to collaborate.
Cool. And then from your point of view, what's like the next hot thing that's going to happen in say by the end of the year?
I think everybody's going to be talking about reliability as the most important problem to solve. AI reliability is already emerging as a topic. By the end of the year, it is going to be the only topic that matters, I think, for AI. All of it is just going to be reliability. It's already started. We're going to move on from MCP, RAG, this, that, whatever, and it's all going to come to reliability. So that's going to be the trending topic. I think the next thing that I'm looking forward to is more AI that starts to replace the analyst and replace the engineer, not augment the analyst or the engineer, but actually let non-technical users be analysts or engineers. That I think is like that's what I'm personally excited about to see. And I think we've already started seeing some of that, but I think next year will truly be like engineering agents and analyst agents that we'll start to see, who are actually like engineering agents for non-technical people or analyst agents for non-technical people. So that's going to be very interesting.
Well, thanks again so much for being on the show. And until next time, stay curious.